In 1906, when a devastating earthquake struck San Jose, rescuers stumbled upon something that left them speechless. At the center of the ruined estate stood a sprawling mansion with staircases climbing into ceilings, doors that opened into sheer drops, and windows peering straight into brick walls. And when they finally found its reclusive owner, Sarah Winchester, she insisted the destruction was not an accident of nature, but a warning from the spirits of the dead. This was not the tale of an ordinary home. This was the Winchester Mystery House, a place some call the most haunted house in California. And from its very first brick, its story has been entangled with ghosts, grief, and the unsettling idea that the dead can shape the living. Before we wander its endless hallways, let me ask you something. Quick pause. Where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Comment below. It's always wild to see these sleepless stories circle the globe. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't vanish before the ending. Because tonight, we're going to trace the mansion's origins back to the woman who built it, brick by brick, as a way of keeping herself, and perhaps the world, safe from the restless spirits she believed were chasing her. The story begins not with a haunting, but with a tragedy. Sarah Winchester, once the wife of firearms heir William Wirt Winchester, inherited not only a fortune but a curse. The very rifles that made her family rich had taken countless lives, and as legend tells it, their spirits demanded repayment. And when Sarah arrived in California, she brought with her not just wealth, but whispers that she had been instructed by a medium to build a house without end, a labyrinth to confuse the angry dead. What followed was 38 years of near-constant construction, producing a home that defies reason, 160 rooms, staircases leading nowhere, secret passages, and a séance chamber at its core. Even now, visitors swear the halls are alive, echoing with footsteps that don't belong to the living. But here's the thing, was Sarah truly guided by the spirits of the slain? Or was the Winchester Mystery House simply the outward reflection of grief too large for one woman to contain? He opened the door to what locals would later call the séance room, and what he saw ended his career forever. But before I tell you, I want to know, have you ever been so scared you quit your job on the spot? Tell me below. To understand the strange mansion that grew out of the California soil, you have to first understand the woman behind it. Sarah Lockwood Pardee Winchester was born in 1839 in New Haven, Connecticut. By all accounts, she was brilliant, fluent in several languages, accomplished in music, and considered one of the most educated women of her time. She married William Wirt Winchester, heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, in 1862. At first glance, it seemed like a charmed life, wealth, status, and the promise of a future carved from American industry. But tragedy would soon stalk her. In 1866, Sarah and William had their first and only child, Annie Pardee Winchester. She lived for just a few weeks, dying from the wasting disease known then as marasmus. That loss shattered Sarah. Friends described her as retreating into silence, her once bright energy dimmed. And then, in 1881, her husband William died of tuberculosis. Within 15 years, Sarah had buried both her child and her husband. When the estate was settled, she inherited not only his massive fortune, today worth hundreds of millions, but also 50% ownership of the Winchester Arms empire. Her income alone was astronomical, reportedly about $1,000 a day back then, over $25,000 a day in today's money. But for Sarah, the fortune was no blessing. The wealth was built on rifles, the Winchester repeating rifle, the infamous gun that won the West. To many, it was a marvel of engineering, a symbol of progress. But to Sarah, it was an empire drenched in blood. Soldiers, outlaws, Native Americans, civilians, the rifle had claimed untold lives. And so grief twisted into guilt. Legend says Sarah turned to spiritualism, a booming movement in the late 19th century. Mediums, séances, and the idea of speaking with the dead were not fringe in those days. They were fashionable among the wealthy and powerful. It was said that one medium told Sarah the deaths from the Winchester rifle had cursed her family, and that the only way to appease these spirits was to move west and build. The instructions were chilling. Build a house. Keep building. Never stop. For as long as the hammer keeps striking, you will live. When the building ends, so will your life. And so Sarah left New England, crossing the country alone, carrying her grief, her fortune, and perhaps her fear of the dead. In 1884 she purchased an unfinished farmhouse in the Santa Clara Valley. From that modest property, she began an extraordinary, never-ending project, one that would transform into a 7-story labyrinth of staircases, secret rooms, and endless hallways. Even before the mansion reached its full size, neighbors whispered about the eccentric widow. Why did she build at all hours? Why were there blueprints no builder could understand? Why did workers add rooms, then tear them down, then add them again? The mansion grew not in a straight line, but like a living organism, twisting, sprawling, confusing even those who worked on it. To some, Sarah was a visionary. To others, she was a haunted woman trying to outwit ghosts. And as the years passed, her reputation in San Jose became as strange as her mansion. But what exactly did she build, and why did the house defy reason? That's where the story turns from tragedy into mystery. When Sarah Winchester arrived in California in 1884, she wasn't simply buying land, she was seeking sanctuary. The Santa Clara Valley, quiet and green, seemed far removed from the funerals and tombstones that had defined her life back east. But soon after purchasing the farmhouse, neighbors began noticing something peculiar. Almost immediately, construction crews were hired. At first, it looked like any renovation, carpenters reinforcing beams, masons laying new foundations. But unlike other projects, this one had no end date. Day after day, year after year, the sound of hammers echoed through the orchards. By some accounts, Sarah had crews working in shifts so the building never truly stopped, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The legend goes that Sarah's instructions weren't her own, but whispered to her by the dead. Spiritualism was sweeping America at the time. Séances were common among the wealthy. Even Abraham Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, famously sought mediums to contact her lost son. In this climate, Sarah's fascination didn't seem so strange, at least, not at first. But what made Sarah unique was her devotion. According to lore, she consulted mediums regularly, one of whom told her that she must build a house designed not for the living, but to confuse the spirits of the dead. The ghosts of those slain by Winchester rifles would wander her home, lost in staircases that led to nowhere, trapped by doors that opened into walls, distracted by hallways that circled back on themselves. If the stories are true, she believed the very act of building kept her alive. Workers recalled that no plan was ever final. A staircase would be built, then demolished the next week. Rooms would be constructed, then sealed off without explanation. Blueprints were drawn in pencil, erased, and redrawn. Architects called the designs impossible. Yet Sarah insisted. And then there was the room at the heart of the legend, the so-called séance chamber. Some say she entered this room every midnight, lit a single candle, and waited in silence. At the stroke of 12, she would commune with spirits, asking them what should be built next. Guides today point to that chamber with a mixture of awe and dread. But skeptics claim it was once a simple bedroom, its legend inflated by storytellers after her death. Still, there's no denying the obsession. By the turn of the century, Sarah's modest farmhouse had mutated into a sprawling maze. 7 stories tall in some places, sprawling outward in others, it seemed to defy both gravity and reason. Neighbors whispered about the strange widow who refused visitors, who wore a dark veil, who walked the grounds at night carrying a lantern. Was she following ghostly orders? Or was this endless building simply the outward shape of grief? A ritual of hammer and nail to quiet the sorrow that never left her. Whatever the truth, the obsession was just beginning. Because soon, the house itself would take on a life of its own. Step through the front door of the Winchester Mystery House, and you'll quickly realize you're not in an ordinary home. The air feels heavy, the layout disorients, and within minutes, even seasoned tour guides admit, it's easy to get lost. The house doesn't flow like a mansion. It coils like a labyrinth. A hallway stretches forward, only to double back on itself. A staircase climbs confidently upward, but stops at the ceiling. A door swings wide to reveal nothing. Just a two-story drop to the gardens below. Sarah's home was a puzzle box, and every piece seemed designed to confuse. There are over 2,000 doors. Some lead to cozy parlors, while others open to brick walls. 10,000 windows let in the light, yet some are set into the floor, or layered behind other windows. A grand staircase winds elegantly upward, but its rise is so gradual that it spans 7 flights before reaching the next floor, supposedly built to accommodate Sarah's arthritis. But not all choices were practical. Take the door to nowhere. Open it, and you'd fall straight into the courtyard below. Or the staircase to the ceiling. An ascent that promises progress but halts abruptly, trapping you against solid wood. There are chimneys that stop feet short of the roof, skylights built into floors, and hallways that shrink to narrow slots before expanding again. Guides say Sarah was deliberately confusing spirits. The idea was that angry ghosts chasing her would lose themselves in the mansion's nonsense design. They'd wander, trapped in circles, distracted by doors that led into darkness. The spirits could roam, but never reach her. But skeptics have another theory. Some claim the oddities weren't spiritual at all, but the result of constant, unplanned construction. With no master blueprint, builders simply followed orders day by day. A staircase added one year might be blocked by a room the next. What looks intentional could simply be chaos layered on chaos. Still, the effect is undeniable. Walk inside, and the house feels alive. Floors slope underfoot. Shadows collect in corners that shouldn't exist. Even in daylight, visitors describe a sense of being watched, as though the very walls are listening. And then, deep within the mansion, lies the strangest chamber of all. Tucked behind layers of doors is a room that many call the séance room. Small, windowless, and connected by multiple doors, some of them false, it became the heart of the legend. According to lore, this was where Sarah communed with the dead. Where, at midnight, she asked spirits which halls to extend, which rooms to seal, which staircases to build. But whether or not she ever sat in the darkness speaking to unseen voices, one thing is certain: this room radiates unease. Workers reported cold drafts, flickering lamps, and the feeling of hands brushing against them in the dark. Was it the architecture itself that unsettled them? Or had Sarah built not just a maze, but a spiritual trap, a net designed to hold something we cannot see? Whatever her intention, by the turn of the century, the house had transformed into a legend of its own. And with it came stories, not just of strange architecture, but of something haunting the endless halls. By the late 1890s, the Winchester Mystery House wasn't just a mansion under construction, it was a story whispered across California. Locals claimed strange lights flickered in the windows long after midnight. Carpenters who worked by day insisted they heard footsteps in the halls when no one was around. Sarah's reputation fueled it all. The reclusive widow rarely spoke to outsiders, and when she did, she was vague and cryptic. To some, she was an eccentric woman with endless money. To others, she was living proof that the supernatural was real. Rumors spread that every night at midnight Sarah retreated to the séance room. There, she supposedly rang a bell, summoning the spirits. For hours she would consult with the dead, listening, writing notes, and dictating instructions for the next day's construction. Then, at 2 a.m., she rang the bell again to dismiss them. Workers swore they felt presences during these rituals. Some spoke of icy winds that whipped through sealed rooms. Others described hearing muffled voices that seemed to echo from inside the walls. A few left the job entirely, claiming the house itself was cursed. Visitors, too, had their share of stories. Guests reported doors that opened on their own, rocking chairs that moved when untouched, and shadowy figures standing at the ends of halls, figures that dissolved into nothing when approached. The most common report was the sound of hammering in the dead of night, long after the day's labor had ended. To many it seemed the construction never truly stopped. And always, the legend circled back to Sarah herself. Locals whispered that she wasn't just haunted, she was hunted. Spirits of the thousands killed by Winchester rifles demanded her attention. The only way to appease them was to keep building. If she ever stopped, they would take her life. By the turn of the century, the mansion was no longer just a house. It was a living myth. Newspapers called it the house built by spirits. Guides began leading curious onlookers to the gates, pointing out the endless construction and spinning tales of ghostly laborers who worked alongside the living. For the residents of San Jose, the Winchester Mystery House wasn't just the strangest home in California. It was the most haunted. And whether or not Sarah believed the stories, she did little to stop them. The hammers kept swinging. The saws kept cutting. The house kept growing. But if Sarah was truly building a maze to protect herself, it begged a terrifying question: what exactly was she trying to keep out? Do you think Sarah Winchester was haunted by restless spirits, or was she haunted only by her own grief and guilt? Drop your theory in the comments. I'll be reading them all. April 18, 1906, is a date seared into California history. The San Francisco earthquake leveled cities, toppled chimneys, and claimed thousands of lives. But for the Winchester Mystery House, the disaster didn't end with the ground shaking. It became a defining moment in its legend. The mansion, sprawling and rambling as it was, suffered extensive damage. Portions of walls collapsed. Floors split under the stress. Staircases that had once climbed confidently now hung at impossible angles. Even the so-called séance room, the heart of Sarah's spiritual communications, sustained cracks that made many wonder if the spirits themselves were warning her. Accounts differ on Sarah's immediate reaction. Some say she walked the ruins calmly, lantern in hand, whispering to unseen forces as she inspected the damage. Others claim she fainted in disbelief, sobbing at the destruction of years of work. What's certain is that construction resumed almost immediately. If the earthquake had been meant to halt the project, it failed. Workers who returned after the tremor spoke of something chilling. Doors that had once led into walls now opened onto gaping voids. Rooms that had been stable now seemed alive, shifting subtly when no one was looking. Some claimed that tools left overnight were mysteriously moved, as though an unseen hand was helping, or watching, the rebuilding. The earthquake seemed to heighten the mansion's eerie reputation. Visitors reported new phenomena after the quake. Footsteps echoed where none should exist, and whispers seemed louder, almost as if the house itself was reacting to the trauma. Locals whispered that the spirits were angry, or perhaps intrigued, by the catastrophe. For Sarah, the disaster didn't slow her obsessive construction, it intensified it. The rebuilding introduced even stranger features: staircases that doubled back on themselves, windows inserted into ceilings, doors that led directly to the outside air. According to legend, these changes were not arbitrary. Every new twist, every odd room, was meant to confuse the spirits further, to placate them, to keep herself safe, and to continue her unending ritual. But it wasn't just the earthquake that marked a turning point. Around this time, more people began claiming actual sightings of spirits in the mansion. Shadows darted across halls. Visitors spoke of cold spots and disembodied hands. The wheelbarrow ghost, a shadowy figure pushing an invisible load, became a common tale. Even the most skeptical workers admitted they sometimes left the house in silence, unsettled by the atmosphere. And yet, Sarah never publicly acknowledged these hauntings. She carried on with her construction as if the house itself were a living entity she had to obey. Some historians suggest this was a blend of superstition and psychological coping. Others believe she truly communicated with spirits, taking guidance on where to build next. Whatever the truth, one thing became undeniable: the Winchester Mystery House was no ordinary home. The earthquake had exposed vulnerabilities, but it had also amplified the house's uncanny essence. By the early 20th century, the mansion had become a sprawling maze, a labyrinth that seemed alive with purpose, mystery, and, many claimed, restless souls. The disaster that might have ended the project instead fueled it, and the line between grief, obsession, and the paranormal began to blur. By the mid-20th century, the Winchester Mystery House had become more than a local legend. It was a tourist attraction, a curiosity, and for some, a magnet for those chasing the paranormal. But with stories come questions, and with questions come skeptics. Investigators began visiting, hoping to separate fact from folklore. Among the most notable was Joe Nickell, a famed paranormal researcher and skeptic. Nickell examined the mansion with a critical eye, documenting inconsistencies in ghost stories and architectural claims. He found that many of the hauntings could be explained by natural causes: the creaking of old wood, drafts moving doors, and echoes amplified by long hallways. Yet even skeptics couldn't ignore the sheer oddity of the building itself. A structure built without a master plan, with rooms and staircases added seemingly at random, created phenomena that felt supernatural even to the rational mind. Guides admitted that even they occasionally felt watched, as if the mansion itself had a presence. Paranormal groups, including TAP's West Coast, have conducted investigations at the house, using modern equipment like EMF detectors, infrared cameras, and audio recorders. Their reports are mixed. Some claim to capture unexplained sounds, footsteps echoing through empty hallways, whispers without a source, and occasional shadowy figures glimpsed in the corner of rooms. Others admit that the mansion's acoustics, structural quirks, and human psychology can easily produce similar effects. Even the official tours play with perception. Certain rooms are dimly lit, staircases intentionally confusing, and guided stories emphasize ghostly legends alongside historical facts. Visitors leave wondering which experiences were real and which were crafted to enhance the mystery. Yet the skeptics' reports don't erase the experiences of witnesses who worked or lived in the house. Many staff members claim that the mansion behaves in ways that defy logic. Doors swing open on their own, lights flicker without explanation, and objects appear in new locations overnight. Even the most rational employees admit an eerie feeling, a sensation that the house is aware of their presence. Some researchers suggest that Sarah's architectural chaos itself amplifies the mind's tendency to see patterns and spirits where none exist. Others argue that grief, obsession, and superstition blended over decades to create a place charged with psychic energy. Whatever the cause, the investigations only deepened the allure. The Winchester Mystery House became a space where the living and the stories of the dead collided, where history, myth, and psychological tension intertwined. And it's here, amid the skeptics and the believers, that the house seems to whisper its most chilling truths. The boundaries between reality and legend are thinner than we like to admit. The Winchester Mystery House is not only a marvel of architecture, it is a theater of whispered experiences. Over the decades, countless employees, visitors, and tour guides have reported phenomena that defy ordinary explanation. One of the earliest staff members, a carpenter named Thomas Reynolds, described arriving at the mansion before sunrise. He swore he saw the faint outline of a woman standing at the end of a hallway, her silhouette illuminated by a soft, unnatural glow. "I called her name," he later said, "but she didn't move. And then she vanished, as if swallowed by the walls themselves." Housekeepers have told similar stories. Laundry left neatly folded in one room sometimes appears in another, untouched by human hands. Lamps turn on or off without warning, and doors creak open on their own, even in sealed rooms. One night, a maid reported hearing the unmistakable sound of wheelbarrows being pushed along the hallways, yet the mansion's labyrinth contains no wheelbarrows, only echoes of imagination, or so it seems. Tour guides, who lead hundreds of visitors each week, have admitted to moments of genuine unease. Some recount seeing fleeting shadows dart across walls, lights flickering inexplicably, and whispers that vanish when investigated. "You tell the story for the tourists," one guide confessed. "But sometimes I'm the one holding my breath as we walk past the séance room." Even visitors contribute to the mansion's mythos. Guests have claimed cold spots so intense they could feel a chill in their bones. Cameras sometimes capture blurs and orbs in hallways where nothing should be. And though skeptics attribute these to dust, reflection, or faulty equipment, the sheer consistency of reports over decades gives pause. One story stands out. A man touring the house late in the evening reported walking into a room and seeing a child sitting in a rocking chair. He described the air growing colder as he stepped closer. When he blinked, the child was gone, but the chair kept moving as if rocked by unseen hands. For many, this is the quintessential example of the house's restless energy. It isn't violent, but it is undeniably present. These eyewitness accounts often converge on key locations: the séance room, staircases that lead nowhere, and hallways that fold back on themselves. Each experience adds layers to the legend, creating an uneasy sense that the house itself is watching, aware, and perhaps alive. And while skeptics can offer explanations, the stories persist, shared again and again by those who have walked its endless corridors, felt the cold drafts, and heard the footsteps that cannot be traced. Because, in the Winchester Mystery House, even when you are alone, you may never truly be alone. The Winchester Mystery House is a monument not only to Sarah Winchester's obsession but also to the strange traces left behind, evidence that some insist points to the supernatural. Over the years, investigators, historians, and curious visitors have catalogued objects, photographs, and architectural anomalies that continue to fuel the legend. Photographs are perhaps the most famous form of lingering evidence. Some show unexplained blurs, faint shapes, or lights appearing where no source exists. In a series of early 20th century images, shadowy figures appear in hallways with no living person in sight. Modern investigators using infrared cameras have occasionally caught fleeting forms at the ends of corridors, vanishing before anyone can approach. Then there are the artifacts, objects that seem to carry a presence of their own. Guides have pointed out a rocking chair that moves by itself, even in empty rooms. Old tools and construction implements, left behind by long-dead workers, sometimes appear in different locations than expected, as if the mansion itself rearranges them. Visitors have reported the scent of faint perfume or cigar smoke, lingering even when the house is empty, a ghostly echo of the past. Architectural anomalies act as both evidence and trap. Staircases that lead nowhere, doors opening into walls, and hidden passageways give the mansion an otherworldly geometry. Paranormal researchers argue that these oddities create conditions for phenomena: light bending oddly, sound echoing unnaturally, and shadows moving in ways that fool the mind. Skeptics, however, admit that even if these occurrences can be explained by physics, the experience of them is undeniable. The house feels alive. A particularly compelling piece of evidence is the so-called séance room. Tools and furniture remain arranged as if awaiting a nightly ritual. Guides claim that electronic devices sometimes fail when brought inside, and visitors report a sensation of pressure or heaviness. It is a place that seems to remember, a chamber echoing the intentions and fears of the woman who built it. Even new discoveries add to the mystery. In recent years, a previously unknown room was found behind layers of walls and staircases, perfectly preserved and untouched. Photographers captured images of the room that some say emit an unnatural glow. While the discovery may simply be an architectural quirk, for believers it is proof that the mansion still holds secrets, quietly revealing them only to those who look closely enough. Between photographs, moving objects, architectural oddities, and sensory impressions, the Winchester Mystery House is a repository of stories, traces of both grief and legend. And while skeptics can offer explanations rooted in physics, psychology, or chance, no one can fully deny the feeling that some essence of Sarah Winchester, or the spirits she sought to appease, remains. The house does not scream or shout. It does not chase or attack. It merely exists, watching, waiting, and occasionally whispering in ways that the living can feel but not fully comprehend. And as the mansion continues to fascinate visitors and investigators alike, one question becomes unavoidable. How much of what is seen is history, and how much is something that refuses to die? The Winchester Mystery House is more than a building, it's a symbol, a mirror reflecting both human grief and our fascination with the unknown. Over the decades, it has captured imaginations not just for its architectural oddities, but for the ghost stories that seem woven into its very walls. Culturally, the mansion has influenced countless haunted house narratives. From books to films, its labyrinthine hallways and doors to nowhere are almost archetypal, a place where the living meet the spirits, where obsession twists architecture into an instrument of survival. Movies inspired by Sarah Winchester's life often amplify the supernatural, portraying the house as an entity alive with malevolent or protective force. Yet behind the dramatization lies a deeper truth. One woman's grief can ripple across decades, shaping stories that haunt the public imagination. Psychologically, the mansion presents a study in perception. Visitors often report unease, dizziness, or disorientation, a phenomenon likely amplified by the irregular construction. Rooms that twist unexpectedly, stairs ending abruptly, and hidden passageways challenge spatial awareness, triggering heightened senses and, perhaps, fear of the unseen. Many claim that even the most rational mind can feel watched, a tension between reality and imagination heightened by the legend. The house also embodies the interplay between loss and obsession. Sarah Winchester's construction obsession, driven by grief and possibly fear of the dead, created a physical manifestation of her inner turmoil. Today, psychologists suggest that the mansion itself is a form of coping, a ritualized way to channel guilt and anxiety into something tangible, something that could be manipulated and controlled. But the unintended consequence is that the house, with all its twists and hidden spaces, evokes the uncanny. Visitors sense patterns, presences, and narratives even where none may exist. Tourism has only amplified the psychological impact. The mansion draws thousands every year, each visitor primed with stories of ghosts and unexplained activity. The cultural expectation of haunting shapes perception. The architecture, eerie lighting, and narrative combine to produce experiences that feel real, even if they have natural explanations. In essence, the house teaches a lesson about the power of suggestion, about how much our minds can conjure when legend and environment intertwine. And yet, for many, the Winchester Mystery House is not just an intellectual curiosity. It's a deeply personal encounter with the unknown. Some leave shaken, certain they glimpsed a spirit or felt the brush of the unseen. Others leave contemplative, pondering how grief, obsession, and belief can carve a structure so compelling, so alive, it continues to speak decades after its creator has passed. The house has been studied, photographed, filmed, and written about countless times. Yet it continues to resist full understanding. Its cultural footprint is undeniable. The story of Sarah Winchester haunts not only the mansion but the imagination of anyone who learns of her labyrinthine creation. And now, consider this. If you were wandering those endless corridors late at night, with the echoes of footsteps following you, the walls shifting around you, would you dare to explore further? Or turn back, heart racing, haunted by the stories of the past? Have you ever walked into a place that made you feel watched or unsettled? Could you handle wandering the Winchester Mystery House alone at midnight? Comment your answer. I want to see who's brave enough. The Winchester Mystery House stands today not just as a structure of wood and brick, but as a monument to obsession, grief, and the human imagination. Sarah Winchester's life was marked by tragedy, losing her child, losing her husband, and inheriting a fortune intertwined with the deaths of thousands. And in response, she built a mansion that defies reason, a labyrinth meant to appease the dead and protect the living. Walking through the endless corridors, you can almost feel the pulse of her fear, the whispers of the spirits she sought to placate. Every door to nowhere, every staircase that ends abruptly, every hidden room seems designed to confuse, not just the dead, but anyone who dares to navigate the maze. Over the decades, skeptics have tried to explain it all: architectural quirks, psychological suggestion, the echo of grief translated into hammer and nail. Paranormal investigators have captured anomalies, blurs, cold spots, unexplained sounds, but evidence alone cannot capture the essence of the house. Its true haunting lies in the story, in the weight of decades of fear, superstition, and legend pressed into every room. Visitors leave with more questions than answers. They wonder what Sarah truly believed, what she felt as she walked these halls, and whether the spirits she tried to appease still linger. And some leave feeling watched, even after stepping into the sunlight outside, as though the house itself has imprinted on their memory. The Winchester Mystery House is more than a collection of oddities. It is a reminder of the thin line between history and myth, between loss and obsession, between the living and the spirits that may never rest. And though Sarah Winchester passed away in 1922, the house continues to grow, not in wood or stone, but in legend, whispered from visitor to visitor, tour guide to tour guide, story to story. So tonight, as you think of those endless corridors, the staircases that lead nowhere, and the shadows that seem just beyond your sight, consider this carefully. If you ever had to spend a night there, would you keep the lights off, or would you run? The house built by ghosts waits quietly, patient as ever, for the next curious soul brave, or foolish, enough to wander its halls.